Muy buenas tardes a todos nuevamente. Les damos la más cordial de las bienvenidas a Innovapolinav en nuestro 9º webinar. Soy el capitán de corbeta Jorge Maldonado y les recuerdo que todos estos encuentros virtuales son posibles gracias al patrocinio del Gobierno Regional de Valparaíso y al soporte de Corfo con su programa de apoyo al entorno para el emprendimiento y la innovación. Seguiremos presentes todos los martes hasta el 1 de diciembre con panelistas chilenos y extranjeros, donde seguiremos hablando acerca de innovación abierta y los retos y potenciales soluciones asociados a mantener la vigilancia y el control sobre nuestro mar. La semana pasada tuvimos la oportunidad de escuchar al decano de la Escuela de Ingeniería de la Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, al profesor Juan Carlos de la Llera Martín, quien nos presentó los fundamentos y los efectos económicos y sociales que tendría en la matriz productiva de Chile un plan continuo de construcción naval. Además, tuvimos la oportunidad de escuchar al ministro de Defensa Nacional, don Mario Desbordes, al comandante en jefe de la Armada, almirante señor Julio Leiva, y al presidente del Partido por la Democracia, señor Heraldo Muñoz, quienes nos expusieron su posición y reforzaron la importancia e impacto que tendría un plan de estas características para nuestro país. Si no pudieron estar presentes o les gustaría volver a ver la presentación y los comentarios de las autoridades o cualquiera de las conferencias que ya se hayan realizado, pueden acceder a nuestra página web www.innovapolinav.cl. Ahí encontrarán nuestra sala de prensa, donde estamos dejando disponibles todas las conferencias para que las puedan revisar. Como ya les veníamos avisando, hoy es un gran día. Estamos muy contentos de efectuar el lanzamiento de nuestro primer desafío de innovación abierta, para lo cual tenemos varios invitados especiales y que me gustaría poder dejarlos con el primero, al señor vicealmirante Ignacio Mardones Costa, que es el director general del Territorio Marítimo y Marina Mercante Nacional. Mi almirante, muy buenas tardes, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Muy bienvenido a nuestros webinars de Innovapolinav.
Buenas tardes a todos los presentes. La verdad que para mí es un agrado poder presentarme ante ustedes y tener el honor de lanzar este desafío Avante 2020. Como director general del Territorio Marítimo y de Marina Mercante de la Armada, conozco la responsabilidad de lo que significa el esfuerzo de nuestro personal por entregar un servicio de alta calidad a cada uno de los ciudadanos que lo requieran. La tarea no es fácil, es altamente demandante en lo humano y lo técnico, considerando que nuestro mar o área de responsabilidad tiene una extensión superior al territorio de toda América Latina completa. Por ello, promovemos la mejora constante de nuestras capacidades de vigilancia, control, alerta y respuesta ante cualquier actividad que pueda afectar a la protección, la seguridad, los intereses marítimos y medioambientales, con el objeto de tener el conocimiento efectivo de todo lo que acontece en el ámbito marítimo nacional. En el proceso de análisis de cómo ampliamos nuestras capacidades, nos preguntamos, ¿existirán soluciones en Chile? ¿Existirán emprendedores con las capacidades de dar respuesta a los desafíos que tenemos como institución? Estamos convencidos que sí tenemos esas capacidades humanas. Somos conscientes que el proceso para transformar resultados de investigación científica en productos y servicios a disposición de la sociedad conlleva una serie de desafíos a lo largo de una cadena de valor, que varía dependiendo del tipo de tecnología e industria, pero que en general es de una extensión y complejidad tal que no existe institución que abarque el proceso en toda su totalidad. Lo anterior lleva necesariamente a la colaboración entre diferentes capacidades, personas e instituciones, generando una cadena de relaciones cruzadas y simbióticas que conocemos como el ecosistema de investigación, desarrollo e innovación. En este sentido, les quiero agradecer a la Dirección de Programas, Investigación y Desarrollo de la Armada, que en colaboración con la Academia Politécnica Naval y otras organizaciones que mencionaremos más adelante en este panel, han llevado a cabo esta iniciativa de lanzar un desafío de innovación abierta que nos permita conectar desafíos de vigilancia marítima con las capacidades científico-tecnológicas nacionales provenientes de universidades, centros de investigación, centros de formación técnica, institutos profesionales, emprendedores y otros actores del ecosistema nacional de innovación que pueden dar respuesta a estas problemáticas. A esta iniciativa la hemos denominado como Desafío Avante 2020. Durante este proceso, los queremos invitar a trabajar con nosotros en torno a 4 ejes prioritarios para la Armada y específicamente para la Dirección General del Territorio Marítimo. El primero de ellos tiene relación con el litoral norte de nuestro país, donde existen áreas de difícil fiscalización como consecuencia de su morfología o densidad poblacional. Necesitamos y tenemos que ser capaces de detectar las actividades asociadas al uso de borde costero para evitar el desarrollo de actividades ilegales. La pesca ilegal es el segundo tema. Nos preocupa, pues pone en riesgo los recursos naturales que le pertenecen a todos los chilenos, afectando el trabajo de muchos que dependen del mar y el sustento de nuestras futuras generaciones. Para esto, necesitamos generar medios que ayuden a recabar evidencias de esta pesca ilegal para poder tomar las medidas oportunas y legales que aseguren el buen uso del mar. El tercer eje con el que queremos trabajar con ustedes es la detección de las naves que no comparten su posición en la mar, ya sea porque no pueden o porque no quieren. Lo anterior con el objeto de optimizar la toma de decisiones en la planificación de operaciones de búsqueda y rescate, junto al control de las actividades ilícitas. Por último, necesitamos mejorar nuestras capacidades de detectar, a partir de la información proveniente de múltiples fuentes y sistemas, cualquier comportamiento anómalo de quienes transitan por nuestro océano, con el objeto de poder evaluar mejor los riesgos a la vida humana en el mar y evitar la realización de actividades ilegales en nuestro territorio marítimo. La extensión de nuestras grandes áreas de responsabilidad marítima nos impone un gran desafío como Armada y como país. Si tienen alguna idea innovadora de cómo podemos mejorar nuestras capacidades de vigilancia, control, alerta y respuesta, los insto a dar avante a toda fuerza y participar en este desafío Avante 2020. Las bases van a estar publicadas a contar de hoy en la página www.innovapolinav.cl. Muchas gracias a todos y vamos, toda fuerza Avante, Desafío Avante 2020. Muchas gracias.
Soy vida, desde antes de que existiera la propia vida. Soy fuerza, y rujo desde las entrañas de la misma tierra. Soy quien se rompe, quien estalla, quien se postra ante ti, quien estuvo antes de que tú llegaras, y quien estará cuando te marches. Soy quien conocerá a tus hijos, y a los hijos de tus hijos, quien les marcará el rumbo. Soy quien les mostrará los espacios eternos y las líneas infinitas allá en el horizonte. Soy el aire que respiras, el sol que ciega tus ojos, la brisa que te roza en la piel. Soy el poder de alimentarte, de transportarte, de proveerte de futuro. Soy todo lo que esperas que sea. Y aún soy más. Ocupo tanta superficie del planeta que no serías capaz de imaginar. Y albergo tanta nueva vida, nuevas especies animales y ecosistemas que no alcanzarías a comprender. Estoy en las 2/3 partes del mundo en el que habitas. Soy la inmensidad que no puede calcularse. Soy tu mayor grandeza. Y estoy aquí por ti, desde antes que tú llegaras. Y seguiré aquí después de que te marches, si es que lo permites. Soy tu desafío, el de salvarme y velar por mí. El de vigilarme, controlarme y mantenerte alerta. El de protegerme y prevenirte. El de luchar por mí. Soy el desafío de que me salves, para salvarte tú. ¿Te importo? ¿Te importa el mar que tranquilo baña tus costas? He venido a desafiarte, a pedirte que des un paso al frente y formes parte, porque soy tu mayor grandeza. Y estoy aquí por ti. ¿Y tú? Avante, enfrenta el desafío.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Les habla el almirante Ramiro Navaja Santini, director de Programas, Investigación y Desarrollo de la Armada. Espero que hayan disfrutado este video que hemos preparado del Desafío Avante 2020 y queremos con este video abrir el apetito intelectual de todos aquellos emprendedores que piensan que pueden contribuir a nuestro país a través de la Armada, presentando soluciones a 4 problemas que hemos definido de interés institucional para mejorar nuestra vigilancia en nuestras extensas áreas marinas. Para mayores detalles pueden entrar a la página www.innovapolinav.cl y podrán encontrar las bases de participación de este desafío y 4 videos que explican los 4 distintos problemas. Estoy muy contento de estar esta tarde compartiendo con todos ustedes este desafío y estamos aquí en un panel que iniciaremos junto con el capitán de navío Pablo Cifuentes, director de la Academia Politécnica Naval, y con nuestro ministro de Ciencias, Andrés Q. Así que desde aquí, desde el Salón Hyatt de la Academia Politécnica Naval, le doy la bienvenida también al comandante Pablo Cifuentes.
Almirante, muchas gracias. La verdad es que como academia estamos muy contentos, primero, de tenerlo en nuestra casa. Segundo, por el éxito que hemos tenido en esta Innovapolinav, que debido a la pandemia hemos debido innovarnos y hemos logrado establecer este sistema de webinars que hemos tenido bastantes seguidores y un éxito que nos tiene muy contentos. Por supuesto que tengo que agradecerme, almirante, a muchas organizaciones que nos han cooperado, Corfo, Athena, Know-How, autoridades civiles, militares, que han permitido que nosotros podamos abrirnos a la comunidad educativa, académica y fortalecer de alguna manera nuestra tarea principal, que es generar para la institución oficiales, profesionales, personal técnico que sea capaz de trabajar en equipo y sobre todo en los tiempos que se viven hoy, donde los desafíos que se nos plantean cada vez son más exigentes y nosotros de alguna manera con este tipo de iniciativas podemos incentivar a que el ambiente, el ecosistema de la innovación se ponga a dar avante, como dijo el almirante Mardones, en pos de poder establecer soluciones a diferentes desafíos, en este caso marítimos, y que puedan tener algún tipo de utilización dual dependiendo de las soluciones que se encuentren. Así que estamos muy contentos de estar acá.
Muchas gracias, muy importante lo que comenta el comandante Pablo Cifuentes, por cuanto en la Academia Politécnica Naval se forman los futuros tripulantes, oficiales, gente de mar, de todos aquellos buques y aeronaves que el Estado de Chile pone a disposición de la Armada para que cumpla con sus áreas de misión. Hemos visto que la relación que debe existir entre la Dirección de Programa de Investigación y Desarrollo y la Academia Politécnica Naval debe ser fortalecida de manera a generar sinergias para impulsar un nuevo modelo de investigación, desarrollo e innovación que ha incentivado nuestro comandante en jefe a través de una nueva política de investigación y desarrollo. Este modelo de investigación y desarrollo es un modelo más colaborativo, cooperador e integrador con el ecosistema nacional. Lo que queremos es integrarnos totalmente a este ecosistema, de manera que podamos desarrollar en Chile sistemas y equipos que en el futuro sean parte de los buques que estamos impulsando como institución construir en Chile a través de un Plan Nacional Continuo de Construcción Naval. Pero sabemos que esto no es una tarea fácil, no es una tarea que podamos realizar solos, es una tarea que tenemos que realizar en conjunto con alianzas público-privadas, integrando a todos aquellos empresarios, emprendedores, universidades, institutos, etcétera, que sean parte de este Plan Nacional Continuo de Construcción Naval. Ojalá algún día construir toda una industria en torno a la construcción naval. Sabemos que podemos construir sistemas y equipos porque lo hemos hecho antes. Y sabemos que podemos construir buques de mayor complejidad en Chile que puedan tener sistemas y equipos desarrollados por nuestro país y nuestros jóvenes. Es por eso que estamos validando este modelo a través de este desafío Avante 2020. Este es un modelo, como decía, colaborativo y en ese sentido hemos encontrado una gran recepción de múltiples actores, tanto gubernamentales como privados. Quiero referirme específicamente al Ministerio de Ciencia, con quienes hemos tenido varias interacciones desde el ministro, pasando por los CEREMIS, de las distintas macrozonas, y puedo decir que la comunicación ha sido tremendamente fluida y la recepción ha sido muy gratificante. Estamos trabajando en conjunto para lanzar este desafío, y quiero dejar con ustedes ahora a nuestro ministro de Ciencia, Andrés Puch, para que nos dé su impresión con respecto a esta nueva forma de enfrentar la investigación y desarrollo en la institución.
Muchísimas gracias por la invitación también. Quisiera saludar a cada uno de ustedes. Es un privilegio compartir esta sesión con ustedes, con cada uno de ustedes, también con la institución. Y también es un privilegio volver a encontrarnos en esto que, como tú decías, Ramiro, ya ha sido una serie de conversaciones que estamos manteniendo con cada vez mayor frecuencia. Quiero solamente comenzar mencionando la relevancia que le hemos dado al Ministerio de Ciencia desde el comienzo en la vinculación que tiene que tener la ciencia con las Fuerzas Armadas, y en particular en esta ocasión con la Armada. Es algo que hemos impulsado desde el principio. Tenemos un convenio firmado para colaborar con el Ministerio de Defensa en estas materias, porque sabemos que esta interacción es fundamental para el desarrollo de los países, y queremos, por lo tanto, poder desplegar todo el potencial que tiene entonces esta interacción que, como decía al principio, está ya en una etapa de nacimiento. Lo segundo es que coincide este impulso que están dando ustedes con el Avante 2020, con nuestra agenda de innovación y emprendimiento, una agenda que no solamente propone concursos, como yo les voy a comentar en algún momento, sino que es más bien una intención de instalar una institucionalidad en Chile que pueda encadenar desde la producción de conocimiento hasta su aplicación para beneficio de nuestra sociedad, para el desarrollo de industria, para el bienestar también de las personas. Y por lo tanto, una agenda completa donde hay elementos de innovación, hay elementos de emprendimiento y hay este elemento institucional que se materializa, y no quiero dejar de referirme a esto, se materializa por primera vez con este presupuesto 2021, donde se incorporan nuevas capacidades del Ministerio de Ciencia, específicamente en los ámbitos de transferencia tecnológica y de innovación, preparando entonces a esta institucionalidad que le va a servir al país para el futuro. Y el segundo tema al cual me quiero referir es de la relevancia de la vinculación público-privada, donde, por ejemplo, en esta pandemia hemos podido ver el potencial que tiene de distintas maneras esa interacción. Lo vimos en la fabricación de ventiladores mecánicos, lo estamos viendo ahora en el desarrollo de vacunas, lo vimos también en la implementación de la red de laboratorios universitarios, donde el componente privado fue fundamental para los laboratorios. Lo vemos también en el tema de datos y la información, donde la vinculación público-privada ha sido inédita para disponibilizar información para la ciudadanía y también para la investigación científica. Lo mencioné quizás en alguna reunión que tuvimos antes, pero me inspira esta nueva manera de interactuar, porque lo veo en los más grandes emprendimientos que se están hoy día promoviendo en el mundo. Hemos visto una carrera espacial, una carrera espacial que fue fortalecida, que fue promovida, que fue gestada desde las grandes potencias, principalmente como una actividad estatal. Y hemos visto cómo eso hoy día cambia radicalmente. A la nueva conquista espacial, que es una conquista que se hace de la mano con el mundo privado. No solamente interactuando con los privados como proveedores, sino que como socios estratégicos en una misión. Y es en ese sentido el que considero que la vinculación público-privada, el esfuerzo que se hace con Avante 2020 para incorporar esas capacidades científicas, técnicas, hoy día a la Armada, para el beneficio del país, me parece absolutamente fundamental. Y mencionarles que estamos totalmente alineados, porque desde el Ministerio de Ciencia también estamos lanzando desafíos de innovación abierta de interés público, Estamos ya en un proceso que nos está ayudando el Laboratorio de Gobierno. Estamos avanzando en la selección de estos desafíos. Comenzamos con 88 desafíos propuestos. Primero lo acotamos a 8. Hoy día ya lo tenemos acotado a 5, con los cuales estamos trabajando para estructurarlos técnicamente y mostrarlos, como decía Ramiro, para que puedan ser solucionados por la comunidad de innovación, de emprendimiento, y de esa manera que sean entonces capacidades nuevas que se incorporan entonces al sector público sin otro interés que contribuir al bienestar de nuestra población. Quiero, por lo tanto, hacer 2 llamados. El primero, fortalecer y hacer eco del llamado que hizo el vicealmirante Mardones en relación a que la comunidad participe de este reto. Nuestra comunidad de innovación, de emprendimiento, si nosotros podemos hacer un vínculo con ellos, que podamos hacerlo también a través del Ministerio de Ciencia, que participen de este gran desafío. Y lo otro es que estamos totalmente disponibles para aunar esfuerzos. El desafío Avante 2020 en su concepto es muy similar a nuestros retos de innovación de interés público, y nosotros estamos creando un portal de retos de interés público, de innovación, y que ojalá que no sean solamente nuestros retos, sino que pueda ser un portal para darle difusión a muchos otros retos de innovación que estamos viendo que están apareciendo en el sector público y que son tremendamente relevantes para el sector público, y nosotros podemos hacer un esfuerzo, creo, en coordinarlo. Así que muy contento de estar con ustedes, muy comprometido con la misma causa y con esta vinculación que hemos comenzado a forjar entre el Ministerio de Ciencia y la Armada, que creo que tiene un futuro muy promisorio, y aquí en el Ministerio muy comprometidos para trabajar en pos entonces de ese futuro. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor ministro, por sus palabras. La verdad es que desde que le presentamos el año pasado cuáles eran nuestras intenciones con este modelo de investigación y desarrollo más abierto, hemos visto que estamos perfectamente alineados entre los objetivos que usted planteó en su ministerio y los que nos hemos planteado nosotros. Y la relevancia de este desafío Avante 2020 es que es primera vez en Chile que una rama de las Fuerzas Armadas hace público un desafío de innovación abierta para buscar una solución propia de un problema, en este caso naval, y un problema de mucha relevancia para el país, como es poder tener vigilancia en los 26,5 millones de kilómetros cuadrados de áreas marítimas que tenemos. Por lo tanto, esto de poder salir al ecosistema de investigación, desarrollo y emprendimiento, a incentivar a la gente a que venga a participar, hacerles un reto para que puedan encontrar una solución a nuestros problemas, pero no solo eso, sino que al mismo tiempo tratar de que esa solución se convierta en un producto dual que pueda generar un mercado y que pueda permitir que algún emprendedor, alguna empresa pueda seguir subsistiendo producto de esta tecnología que se utilizó para resolver un problema militar, pero con uso dual, creo que es de mucha relevancia. Y ha sido también muy gratificante ver cómo distintas organizaciones, ya sea académicas, las mismas Ceremis y algunas empresas, se han mostrado tan incentivadas de participar con nosotros en este desafío. La verdad es que hemos ido tejiendo una red de contactos, nos hemos ido conociendo, y eso ha permitido generar muchas confianzas para poder dar este impulso con este desafío. Dentro de eso, quiero nombrar a la empresa BMNT, cuyo CEO, Peter Newell, nos va a hablar ahora, porque hemos estado trabajando muy de cerca con ellos. Así que yo ahora los dejo. Agradezco nuevamente que estén presenciando este desafío y retamos a todos, o hacemos un reto a todos aquellos intelectuales, emprendedores chilenos que se atrevan a participar en este desafío Avante 2020.
Bueno, mi almirante, yo quisiera, señor ministro, solamente desde el lado académico manifestar que la Academia Politécnica Naval está abierta a poder seguir trabajando inserta en el ecosistema de la innovación, del desarrollo tecnológico, y por supuesto que estamos apoyando full Avante este desafío, donde invito a todo el mundo académico de la educación superior, especialmente de Chile, para que puedan también incorporarse a la solución a este problema de índole militar marítimo y que pueda también tener una solución dual, tal como lo manifestaba el almirante Navaja. Así que muchas gracias y esperamos que tengamos éxito en este desafío.
Muchas gracias, mi comandante, muchas gracias a mi almirante y al señor ministro por las palabras en esta ceremonia digital. Estamos muy contentos, estamos muy emocionados de poder lanzar este primer desafío de innovación abierta. Y sin lugar a dudas, una palabra que hemos escuchado permanentemente durante los 9 webinars anteriores es la palabra emprendimiento. Así es que, sin más preámbulos, me gustaría poder invitarnos hoy día a escuchar la presentación de Peter Newell, que nos va a hablar del emprendimiento conducido por la misión. Él es un experto en innovación, reconocido a nivel nacional en Estados Unidos, cuyo trabajo está transformando la forma en que el gobierno y otras grandes organizaciones compiten e impulsan el crecimiento. Peter Newell es el CEO de BM&T, una consultora de innovación y una incubadora de tecnología en etapa inicial, que ayuda a resolver algunos de los problemas más difíciles del mundo en seguridad nacional y gobiernos estatales y más. BM&T utiliza una metodología llamada Hacking for X. Nosotros estamos trabajando con ellos en Hacking for Defense para impulsar la innovación a gran escala. Es una adaptación de las técnicas de depuración de problemas perfeccionadas en los campos de batalla de Irak y Afganistán, combinada con las mejores prácticas empleadas por empresas emergentes exitosas de Silicon Valley. El resultado es un proceso disciplinado, basado en evidencia e impulsado por datos para conectar las actividades de innovación en un sistema responsable que ofrece soluciones y supera los obstáculos a la innovación. Antes de unirse a BM&T, Peter se desempeñó como director de las Fuerzas de Equipamiento Rápido del Ejército de Estados Unidos, reportando directamente al liderazgo superior del Ejército. Se le encomendó buscar, integrar y emplear rápidamente soluciones a los problemas emergentes que enfrentan los soldados en el campo de batalla. Peter se retiró del Ejército de los Estados Unidos como coronel en 2013 y durante sus 32 años vistiendo el uniforme, dirigió unidades de infantería mientras realizaba operaciones especiales de combate, operaciones de apoyo a la paz en Panamá, Kosovo, Egipto, Kuwait, Irak y Afganistán. Peter es un Ranger del Ejército que ha recibido numerosos premios que incluyen la Estrella de Plata y la mención de unidad presencial. Tiene una licenciatura de la Kansas State University, una maestría de la US Army Command and General Staff College y una maestría de la National Defense University y certificados avanzados de MIT Sloan School and the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Estaremos recibiendo las preguntas para ser efectuadas al final de la presentación y la presentación es en inglés, así que recuerden que abajo a la derecha tenemos un globito con la forma del planeta en donde podrán seleccionar el idioma de preferencia, español o inglés, que más les acomode para escuchar la presentación de Peter Newell. Peter, thank you to be with us today, and we are very glad to have you with us. And please, if you are able to go ahead with your presentation.
I am ready to go. Thanks so much for that great introduction. My Spanish can keep up with about every third word, but it's a great opportunity to catch up with you. Thank you so much for the invitation to talk at such a great event, and I hope that what I have to say for the next 40 minutes or so is of good service to you. What I would love to leave with you, the one thought, and by the time I finish today, is that from my experience, both from the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan and many other parts of the world, and from my time in Silicon Valley, is that innovation is largely a sociology problem, not a technology problem. Today, it is really about the speed at which we recognize emerging problems and at which we are able to communicate those problems to other people, convince teams of them to assemble on those problems and deliver potential solutions into an environment that is rapidly changing. And that speed is all based on how fast we can connect the right people with the right information. So largely that's what I would love to talk to you about for the next several minutes. And somebody is going to have to help me here because I can't get to the slides.
Do you have the presentation on your computer?
I do have it on my computer, yes.
And so at the bottom of the screen, there should be a green button that says share screen.
At the very bottom. Yep, I got it. Thank you. This may take just a second. The computer catches up with me.
Peter?
Yep.
Are you okay with your share screen? There you are.
I'm here. We're suddenly experiencing some firewall problems. So let's take on, I'll change this real quick.
You have to click your present on your right screen because I'm able to see your screen.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to stop the screen share for just a second. There we go.
There we go. Now we're seeing your PowerPoint.
Yep. Now all I have to do is move the PowerPoint where we need it.
Don't worry.
We're almost there.
Still here.
Okay. My apologies. This is what happens when you don't work out of your office for weeks at a time. And your computer kind of takes over from you. So, as I was saying, the one point that I would like to leave with at the end of this is that this is largely a sociology problem. So, I'm going to talk to you about an example from the battlefields of Afghanistan that I think it best highlights the issues that we have. Unfortunately, it's an Army example because that's where my history comes from. Although I tell you, having worked on the defense space for so many years, that it's easy to replicate this problem in just about any national security domain you come across. Following that, I'll talk to you about how we reacted to this problem, and then the growth of hacking for defense as a solution to one of the issues that we came across. As a scene setter for this particular issue, in about 2010, we were making a significant transition from a heavy ground war in Iraq that was largely vehicle-borne, that brought about the creation of a large program for mine-resisted anti-ambush vehicles, or MRAPs, that the U.S. military eventually deployed by the thousands into Iraq. We ran across similar problems in Afghanistan as the Army transitioned the fight from Iraq to Afghanistan. They simply changed the pipeline of these really exquisite vehicles so that they were being sent to Afghanistan. So if you were in the Pentagon in 2010 and somebody asked you to show you a picture of what the battlefield in Afghanistan was like, this picture is largely what you would get. Large convoys of vehicles moving down roads between villages that were very small, that were spread far apart. Unfortunately, in 2010, we were losing the war. And the president of the United States at the time decided that he needed to send more forces into the country, and eventually deployed up to 20,000 light infantrymen. And the force he deployed, as I said, light infantrymen don't spend most of the time in vehicles. They spend most of the time on the ground. So if you'd actually gone to Afghanistan in 2010, rather than this picture, this is what you would have seen. The unfortunate part about it is that this was right at the beginning of a $1.5 billion program to send more MRAP vehicles into the country. And about the same time, the team of folks in the Pentagon who were responsible for combating improvised explosive devices actually went to the Pentagon and said, we know it's a surprise, but we need $40 million to deploy more lightweight equipment that can be carried on the ground. And the answer they got from multiple approval boards was, well, that's not on the top 10 list of things that theater commander is asking for. It's not on the top 10 list that the Corps in Afghanistan is asking for. So the answer is no. Unfortunately, the Afghanistan, the Taliban, Al Qaeda, whoever the protagonists were well aware of what this change on the battlefield meant. Now I'm going to show you a couple of slides that are largely bar graphs of statistics, and I'll explain why in just a second. This bar graph represents the number of improvised explosive device attacks against dismounted forces in Afghanistan, starting in January of 2009 and ending in December of 2011. So essentially over a 3-year period. On this side of the chart, you'll see that they're very, very low numbers. And in fact, for the first 5 months of the year, there may have been 2 or 3 of these attacks a month, and then it very quickly starts to rise. Where I've put the red arrows, you can see where there's a significant spike in the effectiveness of these attacks. And again, my bar graphs are the casualties, actually the actual attack numbers. So as you see, we go from single digits in May of 2009 to August of 2009, where the Marines entered the Helmand Valley in southern Iraq, and then to essentially January of 2010, and then suddenly at about September of 2010, when we started really pushing forces into the country, you can see we get from, in less than 18 months, single digits to over 900 of these attacks in a single month. While we thought that we were doing a great job of capturing these things, that kind of drew this slide to help people understand the amount of time it took us to recognize that something significant had changed on a battlefield. The Taliban was no longer attacking big, heavy vehicles in convoys, but they were going after dismounted forces. We look at that as what we call an OODA loop. And the bottom left-hand side of my slide, you could see the amount of time it took us to observe a change, orient on it, decide to do something about it, act and deliver something was about 28 months. And those 2 blue circles really recognize the amount of time it took us to realize something had changed and get that so it was a major priority. And then the amount of time it actually took us to deliver solutions. And at the end of the day, it was 28 months. And you keep that 28 months in mind. The Taliban and Al Qaeda, unfortunately, were turning that same cycle in less than 8 months apiece. And as you can see from the bar graph, we would recognize a spike that was something happened. For instance, in August of 2009, the first spike, followed by some action on our part that led to a reduced number of attacks. And in our mind, we were being successful at countering the attacks. Therefore, we promulgated whatever that the technique was across the entire force. Now, unfortunately, what the Taliban were doing, were watching what our response was, coming up with a new solution to what we were doing, stockpiling weapons and equipment, promulgating the TTP, and they would come out and hit us twice as hard. And you can see the difference between their 8-month OODA loop and our 28 months. They ran 3 cycles inside of one of ours. the unfortunate cost of the gap between their speed and our speed on the battlefield was almost 5,000 casualties. That's what those bar graphs represent. 5,000 young men and women who lost their lives or eyesight, limbs, or were permanently wounded in one manner or another through those attacks. I, in fact, made an organization that quite frankly should have recognized what was going on the battlefield and should have seen earlier, responded faster, and provided solutions sooner that would have cut down on those issues. Having looked at this data and looked at the problem in essentially 2011, it caused us to do a pivot with our organization and look real hard at what we were doing and how we were performing that service for the military. And what we found is that first and foremost, that we weren't present on the battlefield where the problems were. We were sitting too far away, looking at too many briefings from too many people that were staff products that were far and away from what the truth was on the ground. We lacked the peripheral vision to understand what the emerging threats were going to be. And what that means is being able to look at what's going on and anticipate that somebody is going to adapt the technology and do something else with it, and allow us time to figure out what the potential solutions were to that. We didn't understand what I would say the contextual understanding of the environment. We didn't understand the difference between building a solution for a supply convoy run with trucks versus building a solution for dismounted forces carrying logistic supplies on the ground up the side of a mountain. Realizing that one solution doesn't fit all, the conditions have a vote and has a significant impact on whether or not that solution will work or not. We lack the partnerships across the entire Department of Defense and around the country that allow us to rapidly find multiple different technologies that might work in different manners or work in concert with one another that will allow us to produce not just a option, but a suite of options that we actually employ on the battlefield. And then finally, we weren't aggressive enough. And I talk about looking for solutions rather than minimum viable products. And by minimum viable products, I mean, what is the first best, fastest thing that I can put in somebody's hands that will cause them to tell me the truth about the problem that they're really working on. Unfortunately, we were too focused on building solutions and handing the perfect solution off, rather than doing whatever we could to speed the iterative nature of the conversation that will allow us to better understand the problem we were solving. Ultimately, we realized that we had no pipeline for innovation. So we built one. And this is actually the original pipeline for the Army's Rapid Equipping Force that starts on one side of the chart with how we gained information from the battlefield through our own soldiers' assessments, our personal relationships with commanders on the ground and what they were telling us, the intelligence trends, and even the requirements we were getting. In the next phase there is how we fused all that understanding and used that to define and describe the types of problems we were working on. And in events that we couldn't quite define it, how we went back and re-attacked that problem so we had better information before we tried to solve it. As you move across the chart, you'll see the big glob of how we got the government and industry to work together in all these mini ecosystems, and how we used that to produce a crop of ideas that eventually we would be able to turn into a suite of solutions. And I describe these solutions sometimes as, top to bottom is, I can give you 60% of solution in 90 days. I can give you 70% in 180 days, or an 80% solution in 6 months. And look at a commander and say, what is it you want today? And in many cases, they would say, 60% solutions, that's great, give it to me now, and I'll wait for something better later on, but 60% better is massive. In other cases, they would say, if it's not a 100% solution, it's not worth the time of day for me to take on and integrate. So I really am willing to wait for the long-term solution. We used this model then to go out and re-attack the way we did business. We started by actually deploying mobile labs, essentially shipping containers that had 3D scanners, 3D printers, scientists and engineers and bench stock in their own communication systems that would allow them to gather information for people coming right off the battlefield. Literally, as they were coming in the gates of the forward operating bases and headed to wherever they live, they'd be able to grab these people and get a really contextual understanding of what they were working on. They used that information to build technical data packages that sent back to the United States that allowed us to get the larger brain working on potential solutions and iterating potential solutions with them in real time. We built integrated priority list of curated problems. And by curated problems, it means that we looked at all of the data, looked at the number of particular problems or requirements we're seeing in a set, and looked at those sets and determined what a threat they were, and essentially prioritized the types of things that we were working on. Then, in fact, you could see from this first list is that number one on the list was attacking the dismounted improvised explosive defeat problem. We had 17 separate requirements and 13 projects on the way that were specifically focused on that issue, and you can look down the rest of them as we did this. I used this particular tool to brief everybody from senior leadership in the Pentagon to members of Congress to parts of the industry to help them better help us find the types of solutions that we were looking for. We built opportunities where we could bring multiple different parties together. And as you can see, this is actually taken from a series of events at Fort Bliss, Texas, where we were trying to create a combat outpost that essentially, I call it net zero, had no external power requirements, was able to take care of its own sewage, and could reuse water multiple times. Now, the goal of this project was to reduce the supply line that we were required to run from bigger bases out to these small farms up in the mountains and reduce the IED threat to those supply convoys. So I literally attacked an IED problem by putting clean energy and clean water on the battlefield to solve my problem. Much different way of looking at it. But critical in this is when we put people in the room, there were people from the national labs, the tactical units, there were vendors, there were deep thinkers in the environment, and we'll let them all collaboratively develop ideas and potential solutions, and then work our way through something that we would actually spend money on. Remember what I said about the environment and contextually understanding how to solve a problem. On one side, you have a robotic bobcat with a mine plow on the front that's designed to clear a path 4 feet wide. And on the other hand, you have not a mine detector, but ground penetrating radar on the end of the stick that used to be a mine detector. Same type problem. One problem is dealing with pressure plate IEDs and footpaths, and the other is trying to find buried IEDs that have no ferrous metal in the triggers, essentially fertilizer and a couple of paper clips. Same environment, same issue, different triggering systems, different weapon system requires a different solution. And you can't, we at the time couldn't put all our money into one versus the other. Literally, it took our ability to layer these things to actually solve the problems. The results after 18 months is that we had generated 850 new problems off the battlefield, prioritized 520 of those, created 360 new projects, delivered 115 solutions to the battlefield, transitioned 20 of those to programs of record, and in the process invested about $1.5 billion. If I were a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, the numbers that we put up here are stellar. They're actually better than the best of the venture capital firms, internationally, in terms of how they look from what they capture and how they very quickly reduce that funnel to the things that are worth spending on and producing. What I will tell you, though, is that we wouldn't have gotten to the 20 solutions in programs of record at the bottom of this chart had we not sourced 850 problems. And as I talk to most organizations, it's not the bottom part that they struggle with. It's actually being able to produce that massive number of problems that keeps their funnel full of things that are worthwhile. The innovation pipeline today, and what I've learned now from that experience, and now having spent 7 years in Silicon Valley building my own company, investing in companies, spinning out companies, and launching the Hacking for Defense program, is that the innovation pipeline is in fact a very real thing. And there are some rules that go to how to make sure that pipeline functions. Today, it is disciplined, evidence-based, data-driven means for connecting innovation into an accountable system that delivers results. We look at it as 5 steps. The first step being how you source problems, technology, people, and ideas. How do you get that mass to start with to ensure that you have a healthy flow through your pipeline so that you can eventually achieve velocity of things coming out of the pipeline? The process of curation, what I took off the battlefields in Afghanistan and Iraq, is how you get to the point that you really believe you're working on the right problem for the right reasons, you have them prioritized, and you have the data behind them to help people understand why it is that one thing is more important than the other. Borrowed from the startup industry, this process of discovery is essentially lean methodology applied in a startup environment where you take the networks you built while you were sourcing and curating, apply it against real things, and validate first that you have the right problem. Validate that you have a viable solution and pathway by which that solution can be delivered. And then finally, that you can do it in a manner that is feasible with the way that service works. Incubation is the process by which you take those nascent investable things that you have validated and actually grow them into businesses or ideas or solutions that can be scaled and reliably delivered into a program of record or driven onto the battlefield. And then finally, what we call transition is actually that process by which we hand off the things that are most fruitful so that they can either be scaled or maintained by use by the service. I talk a lot about numbers, and what I want to do is show you a quick example of what the numbers are when you compare what we've seen in Hacking for Defense versus what I saw in the Rapid Equipping Force. Again, at the far end of the funnel is trying to get that mass number of ideas, technology, problems, and people started working on the types of things that you're interested in. At the bottom of the chart, you can actually see our comparison of what the Rapid Equipping Force did versus what BM&C has done working with Hacking for Defense. Inside the chart are the numbers that I discussed from what the Rapid Equipping Force generated off the battlefield, moving from the total number that we sourced over a 3-year period, eventually, with that 1,391, moving all the way down. H4D now reflects very similar numbers. You can actually see these are actually the 2018 numbers from the Hacking for Defense, where we actually curated 540 problems in 1 year, delivered those problems into universities who fielded 122 teams to work on things that were interesting, and essentially ended up with 28 solutions that came out of the university system. 9 of those solutions became companies that are now delivering services or products to the government for use in the national security arena. At the bottom of that chart, you can actually see the percentages of the success rate of what survived from one phase to the next. And what's important to take away from this chart is the mass or the volume is necessary at one end of the chart in order to create the velocity at the speed at which you want to take something on. And just understanding the types of numbers you have to have moving through an innovation pipeline is critical. We also discovered that each and every step or phase of the innovation pipeline has to have its own strategy, its own infrastructure or processes by which things are done. They have their own activities and methodologies, and there are actually metrics that we use to grade the quality of what comes out of one phase and moves to the next. For instance, we look at curation and we grade how well we're doing curation, not by the number of things that come out of curation, but by the numbers of things that are accepted in discovery. And we do that for each phase. The product of one phase, success, is graded based on what is ingested into the next phase. And that's how we fight our way through the problem of stovepipes. We also realize that there's some serious decisions that have to be made about what gets killed off from one phase to the next. We look at three things. The first, obviously, I think everybody's familiar with, is technology readiness level. The TRL, which is what state is the technology in, versus the IRL, which we call the investment readiness level. We look at the quality of the tech, and investment readiness level looks at the quality of the team that we expect to deliver the tech. Do they have the right structure of the business? Do they have the right IP? Do they have the right contracts? Do they have, the right people to actually stick around long enough to deliver to us? And finally, this last thing we introduced is the ARL, or adoption readiness level. And adoption readiness level really looks at the quality of the people we're handing things to. In the incubation phase, do we have a first user identified? Do we have early adopters identified? And eventually, do we know who the program of record something is going to transition to? So we actually lose TRL, IRL, and ARL to make decisions about how we apportion funding as an investment process to actually make something move. The innovation pipeline obviously supported by lots of activities and methodologies. And I actually produced this slide to help people understand that this isn't something that replaces Scrum or Agile or design thinking or Agile engineering or Lean Launchpad. The innovation pipeline, or H4X, the way we describe this, is essentially the operating system that allows all of these different methodologies to work together and ensures that what's valuable from one moves to the next. But I would stop the discussion on the innovation pipeline there and talk about the challenge of actually producing volume into that pipeline. And this is where Hacking for Defense really became the bellwether of success for us. And in our mind, one of the challenges we had is that we had massive numbers of students in universities, lots of technology that wasn't seeing the problems that the government have, and they weren't being encouraged to work on them. And there wasn't a good place to take everybody, from the government to industry to the academia to students, and give them an environment where they could actually behave like entrepreneurs and produce something real. So we created Hacking for Defense quite by accident after working on a pilot for something at Stanford University. And as we were doing the outbrief for this one event, we got to the end of it, and we were talking to former Secretary of Defense and a few other people, and we had to acknowledge that we didn't think what we were doing was scalable, because we were using students during their vacation to work on something that we thought was important, but wouldn't compete with the regular coursework. And unfortunately for us, a student who had no connection to the military at all, at the back of the room, stood up and said, "Hey, wait a minute. Had this been a class at Stanford, I would have taken it." And the next thing we know, we 9 months later have designed a course called Hacking for Defense that takes government problems, puts them in front of teams of students who self-form as if they're a startup, who then compete to get into a class to be treated like a startup, to actually work on first validating the problem that the government has, and then produce a potential solution to it. And lo and behold, we ran the first class. We had 190 students show up for 32 seats in the class. We had 14 government organizations bring us 28 problems, and we could only take 8. And at the end of the class, out of the 8 teams, we produced 3 companies, one of which today is flying their own satellites above the Earth. So it's a really great success. At the end of the day, we decided that the importance of Hacking for Defense as a program was to allow us to bring interdisciplinary students. At virtually every university in the United States that is taught, it is a combination of business, engineering, medical, liberal science. It doesn't matter as much as it does the diversity of the group of students who wraps themselves around a problem and their passion for solving that problem and producing something. It first designed, if you're familiar with Steve Blank, who is essentially the godfather of the lean startup movement in Silicon Valley, but based on a curriculum that came out of a program he developed for the National Science Foundation called ICOR, probably 6 or 7 years before we started this. Eventually, Hacking for Defense was partnered with a Pentagon organization called the National Security Innovation Network. It actually has expanded as a part of that program inside the Pentagon. The basis for the class is teaching entrepreneurship, not using case studies, but actually allowing students to be the case study. The students work on a real problem with real people that gives them real experience that lends itself to getting real jobs. The students that come out of this course are highly, highly sought after. In fact, a number of the defense primes, folks like Lockheed Martin, actually provide additional funding to some of the universities to support the teams that are in this course. In their mind, they're less interested in the actual technology that's needs produced than they are in hiring those types of students to come work in their organizations. Today, Hacking for Defense is recognized by Congress as a critical program, is funded by the U.S. Congress to expand up to a minimum of 50 universities, which will blow through this year, and is also expanded internationally to the UK, Australia, Norway, I hope Chile soon, and a number of other places. The class is a little different than most class pieces teach. And when I say it's a flipped classroom, which means all of the book learning that students would do is actually online. They're expected to review the material, look at the videos, and actually go out and do the work. And they come back to class and they brief the instructors of the class as if they were a startup talking to their board of directors. And the feedback the board of directors gives the team is as deliberately honest as a board of directors would talk to one of those startups that are trying to encourage them to grow and actually do the right things. The Stanford students will tell you that this is the hardest, most professional rewarding class they have ever taken in their academic career. And we get that feedback from many of the other courses as well. H4D today involves the process of problem sourcing and curation of problems right off of the innovation pipeline to develop problems that can be delivered to a group of universities who can then recruit students to work on those problems, to apply lean methodology and lean theory to validate the problem, create a viable pathway by which to deliver a solution to that problem that's acceptable to the users, determine that it's feasible, and actually come up with what we call a minimum viable product that is a summation of what they've learned about that problem. Finally, the students iteratively present what they learned week over week after week as they develop a better understanding of the problem, the solution space, the user, and the potential pathways and blockages that it takes to actually deliver something. At the end of the course, what we get is a fully validated government problem. And I have to say it honestly, almost every problem that comes into the class at some point there's a pivot in the problem, which was the teams will look at the government problem sponsor and say, yes, we know that you said the problem was X, it's actually Y, and here's why it's the way it is. It is the best market research into a problem potential solution place that you can ever get your hands on. The students in this class will do an average of 120 to 150 interviews to validate their assumptions and thesis using probably 30 to 40 MVPs over the course of 12 to 14 weeks. In each case, every problem space and potential solution place has a very specific common language around it. It also has a network and a framework built with it. And then finally, the students deliver a strategy for how to move forward out of the class. The typical classroom is probably half students and half other people who are part of essentially this very unique startup ecosystem wrapped around the problems. Everything from the military fellows that you see sitting to the left-hand side of this classroom, to former instructors, to other faculty members, to members of the Defense Innovation Unit, to investors who are interested in what the students are doing, to primes and whatever. We teach this class at Stanford in a room that holds 90 people, and we fill it every week. Only 32 of the 90 are students. The others are part of that rather unique ecosystem that's backing up that team to help them actually get through the course. We are very forceful and very driven to get the students out of the classroom and actually out to work with the actual problem owners. And probably the only class of its kind where students are sent to military bases and other places to work alongside the users and gain the experience they need before they come back to the classroom and actually work on those problems. Today, that class, I think this is actually the fall 2020 university slate. I think there's 17 universities in the United States teaching this course this year or this fall, and another 30 in the spring. So I think we'll actually hit 52 universities in the United States. That 52 universities represents probably 220 separate problems that somebody in the government has that would not have been looked at otherwise. More importantly, it represents probably another 1,000 university students who would never have considered working with the government or for the government, or actually interacted with somebody in the military, that might now change the way they view what their public service ought to be in defense of their own nation. Massive ecosystem, and again, I'll come back to what I said at the beginning. Solving emerging problems is a sociology problem, and it really comes down to the speed at which you can build a unique environment like this around a series of unique problems and ensure that there's a pathway by which you can deliver a solution to something. Hacking for defense in the ecosystem that does this almost precedes every ecosystem that somebody wants once they see something that's worthwhile. It's unique in the fact that it delivers students, professors, government problem sponsors, government mentors, and people from the industry, all in one tight ball wrapped around something specific that somebody with a major problem can actually make use of. I want to thank you so much for the patience up front as we get started, but that hits the end of my slides. I'd love to answer any potential questions you might have or clarify anything that did not make sense.
Peter, can you hear me? First of all, thank you for your clear presentation. And before we go to the questions, I would like to make in name of our team, the special thank you to the ONR, the Office of Naval Research, to let us, to make us the contact to have you with us today. So after that, I would like to say some questions about your presentation. First of all, can you elaborate on the characteristics of the team or teams that are needed for running the pipeline?
Yeah, I think as you look at the pipeline and each of the phases, there's a slide in there that I talk about the methodologies and the other things. You know, first and foremost, there needs to be somebody responsible for maintaining the health of the pipeline. And that's the team of people who looks at the volume and ensures that the activities that you're using that are supposed to generate that volume are actually creating the volume that you need. And if I give you, for instance, if you're doing hackathons and the hackathons are producing something, but that something isn't being used by the next step, then perhaps you need to have to change the way you're running hackathons to actually produce a better product. So it's one is making sure you're doing the right activities and the activities are producing the right things that go into the pipeline. The second part of that job is to ensure that somebody is removing blockages in the pipeline that reduce the velocity. Yeah, in many cases, what we find is the policy issues, or their IT issues, or their contracting issues, or their relationship issues that the people actually working in a pipeline run into every single day, but they don't have the power to do something about it. So there's a role and responsibility for somebody to take over reducing the blockages that restrict the throughput of the pipeline or reduce the velocity. So one is about the volume, make sure you're doing the right things. Another is about ensuring that you're removing the blockages. The third is capturing the decision points and making sure that when senior leadership is asked to make a decision about something, that they have the right data and they're making the right decisions for the right reasons. And that we're only asking for them to donate enough time to actually do that before we let the hard work go back to work and let the senior leadership go back to what they do on a daily basis. So there's clearly what I would call the operating system engineers, that the people that want to make sure the operating system works. And then in terms of every activity and phase in that, as you can see from the list of activities, there are lots of opportunities for people to do things that are value added. But it's a matter of an organization taking responsibility for making sure that there's a common language amongst them and that the data produced from one is valuable to the next activity. That's probably the single biggest thing I can think in terms of roles.
And in terms of roles, Peter, and you said some very key words in your answer. For example, taking hard decisions and doing the unblock in some part of the pipeline. What is the role of the leadership on running the pipeline, and what should they expect out of it?
Well, at the end of the day, it's not a pipeline if it doesn't deliver solutions to something. So Steve Blank and I are completely aligned on this. If it's not innovation unless somebody uses it to change something. So at the end of the day, it's not about how many things I put in. It really is what I get out at the end. And you can't forget that. You can't, even in the United States, I think we're guilty of what I call innovation theater, is running all these events to produce a moment, and then nothing happens. And you do that time and time again, it creates what we call innovation exhaustion. People are so tired of coming to events and things and not seeing anything move forward because it's not done in a disciplined manner. So from a leadership standpoint, is actually looking critically, having a way to monitor your pipeline, just to understand what's in the pipeline, what phase it's in, and what the decision criteria are for things to gain funding and investment to move forward is part of what I call the senior leadership's role in making sure that the pipeline is healthy. It does take a great deal of rigor and discipline to run. It has to be backed by data and not assumptions, and not just, I got a good idea, let's make the good idea work, but truly align that with a problem and a solution at the end. Something I didn't talk about, and I probably should have, is from a doctrinal standpoint, there's no doctrine for innovation in the military. So one is from a leadership standpoint of how do you not just rent entrepreneurs from the civilian world, but how do you create uniformed entrepreneurs? People who are experts at the military system and are experienced in actually making those risk decisions about what to do versus what not to do, and how you keep them promoted so that you have people who are experienced in running your pipeline. And the example I use is in Silicon Valley and all the places where we do entrepreneurship. At Stanford University, there are 240 separate courses in entrepreneurship taught every semester. 240. And the National Defense University that I went through as a colonel, none. Yet the military's got the largest, R&D budget, the biggest, nastiest problems in the world, and the biggest need to do something different. Yet there was nothing in the professional military and civilian education system that taught somebody to be an entrepreneur. In fact, it was the opposite. That taught you how not to be different. Now, I think that's a significant challenge for the leadership to figure out is, how do I educate, allow people to gain experience, identify and promote the true entrepreneurs that I want in charge of this type of system.
And Peter, we've been discussing a lot about organizations, and I would like to ask you some, maybe a little bit hard about that. Which organizations are supporting with the budget those investigations and innovations, and later on their massive production? What percentage is coming from your national or defense yearly budget, and what from other funding sources?
Boy, it would be all over the map. And I think the way that we have treated many things, for instance, Hacking for Defense is a great example where we built it without any government funding. And then eventually built something the government wanted to expand. So the way Hacking for Defense works is the government funds problem sourcing and problem curation to ensure that the problems delivered to universities are appropriate for the university. The government funds the education for university professors and helps them set up the program at the university. The universities pay for their own programs. So the government doesn't pay the university to teach the course. And the idea is that it's a highly valuable course for the university to teach and very popular with students, and they'll take it. In some cases, industry is providing additional funding for student teams to actually get out and travel and go see the problem places. And post-course, the government steps back in with industry and says, for those teams that are really interesting, that have great ideas, here's some additional capital. We'll let you prove it and see if there's a company to build here. And that funding at the end comes from venture capital, government, and private organizations. As you can see how they're all layered in there together, but folks understand their role in getting something going. In places like O&R, who you know is a significant partner with ours, we're a partner to them. The funding comes from multiple different directions. But the more you learn about an ecosystem, part of what you're learning about is what other people are working on this thing that we're working on that are vested in it, who would put funding or people into it. And surprisingly, what I find that funding is not only the challenge is getting people away from the job that they're doing and get them tied to a team to actually produce something. And I gave you probably the best example I can of the people problem is in working with a client in the government. They were combining assets from multiple labs working on something related to drone swarms. And the people were coming from different labs, but eventually they had two solid teams. When they finished and they said, okay, these are great ideas, we want to incubate something, they could not figure out how to move the people temporarily from those labs someplace to continue to work. That the HR system of that organization could not figure out how to pay them and move the dollars and do whatever in a timely fashion. And it was brutal. So sometimes it's not just a funding issue, but also who's donating manpower and people to actually help something work.
Peter, we've been discussing about team leadership and budget, but just to stand up this four-leg table, how do you manage the clearing issues at Hacking for Defense? As a colonel, and in our case as a Navy, it's always a hard decision how to manage that clearance for the information that we manage. How do you do it?
It's a big team. I think from a structural standpoint, there are a number of partnerships built over time. So while Hacking for Defense was developed internally to BM&T as a commercial company, we found over time that we needed a nonprofit to actually engage universities. So we created a nonprofit. So there's a nonprofit called the Common Mission Project. You can actually go to commonmission.us and you can see the Common Mission Project actually administers the Hacking for Defense program academically. BM&T, working with the government, is responsible for problem curation, problem sourcing, but then hands that stuff over to the CM, the Common Mission. Common Mission Project is responsible for educating the universities, onboarding them, distributing the problems, and essentially what I would call the educational quality of the program that's delivered. Because after all, the universities are responsible for delivering an education, not just building products. So you have to make sure that the rigor is there that they look for. That all takes relationship building, and it's almost constant. Somebody has to be responsible for searching for and finding good quality problem sponsors and teaching them what their role is in this system. At the same time, we're educating the universities on what their role is, helping them find good mentors and teaching them what their role is. At the same time, we are looking at the pedagogy of how lean methodology is taught and ensuring that it's appropriate for what we're doing. So there's somebody in this system who is responsible for all of that, and somebody whose job is to look at it at the end and look at the results and deliver the results back into the ecosystem so that that anecdotal evidence can be used by other people for other things.
Peter, thank you very much again for being with us today and give us enough time to discuss a little bit about your presentation. We are very grateful. And if you let me just say some words in Spanish, me gustaría reiterar el agradecimiento a la ONR, Office Naval Research, a KnowHub, a Athena Lab y a BM&T por estar acompañándonos durante este proceso de implementar la metodología de Hacking for Defense y Curation Problem que llevamos realizando hace un tiempo para poder ofrecerles el desafío en los más altos estándares que ya pueden visitar en nuestra página web www.innovapolinav. Tenemos arriba a la derecha una pestaña que dice Desafío Avante. Pueden ingresar ahí, revisar la explicación de cuáles son los problemas que hemos liberado en esta oportunidad y al final van a poder descargar, al final de cada uno de los problemas, van a poder descargar las bases de este concurso. Así que reiterar la invitación a participar en este primer desafío de innovación abierta impulsado por una de las ramas de la Fuerza Armada. Esperamos que hayan disfrutado la presentación y los dejamos cordialmente invitados para seguirnos en nuestras redes sociales y a que asistan el próximo martes 13 de octubre en este mismo horario de 15 a pasadito las 16:15 horas, donde Rahul Kapoor nos hablará de cómo muchas innovaciones disruptivas, a pesar del enorme potencial que tienen desde su idea, sufren de retraso en su creación de valor o incluso fallan en la creación de este. Revisaremos su investigación de cómo las innovaciones disruptivas requieren del manejo de tecnologías inciertas, de un ecosistema y un modelo de negocio. Inscríbanse en www.innovapolinav, donde podrán revisar con más detalle en las próximas conferencias. Los esperamos el próximo martes 13 de octubre. Thank you, Peter, again, for your clear presentation. Y esperamos tenerlos con nosotros nuevamente el próximo martes 13 de octubre a contar de las 3 de la tarde. Que tengan muy buenas tardes.